Extending into the subtropics, the Everglades is a unique domain where the bite of a killing frost is almost never felt, and dew perfects the morning landscape. "400 miles north on the Peninsula River, hard-hitting frost shapes a different realm where the sable palm is one of the few subtropical plants hardy enough to survive. Wild Florida can also look like this. Between these two extremes, and just north of Lake Okeechobee, the swamps around Fish-Eating Creek blend temperate and subtropical species of plants and animals into a rich tapestry of life. Here, too, wild Florida displays itself in splendor. Few experiences can match a quiet glide down a stretch of ebony water. In South Florida, the terrain is utterly flat, but in the north, the river banks can rise steeply, as they do on the Upper Swanee. In either place, a canoe is your best chance of getting close to some of Florida's most dramatic animals. But you've got to paddle quietly, and it's best not to utter a sound. With only a few panthers left in Florida, the only cat you have much hope of seeing is the bobcat. It's much smaller and with just a stub of a tail. Rafts of floating water hyacinths may slow you down in some places, but this might attract a curious family of river otters. Such a sight can never be forgotten. More than anything else, water characterizes the Florida environment. What Florida needs most is lots of pure, undiverted water. The Swanee Delta is a prime example. Over time, silt deposited here by the river has made a place where the river can branch into hundreds of little distributaries. In the hidden meanders of this estuary, fish and shrimp from the Gulf of Mexico breed in the dark waters. One of the most remarkable fish to spawn in Swanee water is the Gulf sturgeon. This giant, which is prized for its meat, can exceed 10 feet in length. Although sturgeon live in salt water, they linger in the river for several months around spawning time, but they do not feed here. They do all their feeding in the Gulf by feeling along the bottom with their barbels and siphoning tiny creatures out of the mud. Wildlife biologist Steve Carr is studying the movements of Gulf sturgeon in hopes of solving two mysteries. Where in the Swanee does the sturgeon spawn? And why is its population dwindling? The fish's survival may hinge on what he finds. In March, sturgeon swimming into the Swanee rub shoulders with manatees heading the other way. For the lumbering manatee, the lure of the river is its freshwater artesian springs gushing at 72 degrees Fahrenheit all through the year. This may seem cool in the summer, but in winter, it's warmer than the coastal seas. Manatees bask in the springs from December until March. They head up the Swanee as far north as Manatee Springs. They also frequent Blue Springs on the St. Johns River and various springs in the Crystal River. With just 1,200 manatees surviving in Florida, it's unfortunate that females give birth to only one calf every 3 or 4 years. But the young are well cared for, and it's not unusual to see a rumple-skinned calf flanking its mother while nursing from nipples in the pit of the mother's arm. Yet manatees can't breed fast enough to replace the 24 killed by powerboats each year. Nearly all survivors bear the sickle-shaped scars of propellers on their backs. Despite this, manatees are more than tolerant of man. At Blue Spring, many a diver has been surprised to find himself suddenly wrapped in a very large embrace. Manatees are the only plant-eating marine mammals in the world. They eat about 100 pounds of vegetation every day. That's why people like to call them sea cows. By April, South Florida's vast wetlands are in a critical shortage of water. Only a few pools and ponds remain from the broad sheet of water that drifted over the prairies during the summer months. In recent years, the effects of the winter drought have been exaggerated by a huge system of canals dug over the past 70 years to reclaim land for agriculture and housing. Today, diminished animal populations squeeze into fewer and smaller ponds. Of course, this concentration of life produces some dramatic sights, such as an occasional flock of rare white pelicans. Perhaps more than any other bird, the wood stork has been decimated by lower water levels. At the Shark Valley Observation Tower on the northern edge of Everglades National Park, visitors are often surprised to find not a green jungle, but a sea of sawgrass dotted with mounds of hardwood trees called hammocks. In winter, about the only water you can find in the grassy river is in the pond at the base of the tower. Alligators rule the pond. By May, the canal next to the Shark Valley Tramway is almost dry. The water is now so poor in oxygen that only air-gulping catfish, gar, and bowfins can endure. For a few short weeks, the otter reaps a veritable bounty. For the diminishing pool is like a net that is gradually lifted until all the fish lie in a squirming mass at the bottom. As the water evaporates, the pool becomes a bath of mud, and the otter, who can no longer see in it, must now grope for its prey. The activity at winter ponds and the competition for food is most intense during the spring nesting of birds. One of the most cunning competitors is the anhinga, a diver with a spear gun neck. She doesn't wait for fish, she goes after them. Conveniently, her chicks are close by in a willow at the edge of the fishing pond. The black-necked male arrives with a load of fish. The neck of the female is tan. Although the anhinga sometimes nests in small groups, Florida's wading birds, the herons, ibis, and so forth, often congregate into large rookeries, such as the one on Pelican Island near Vero Beach. The nesting rookery is a safe haven for its members because there are plenty of lookouts to signal danger. Furthermore, islands make good nesting sites because they have fewer predators than the mainland. During the breeding season, male wading birds are resplendent with long and lacy plumes. In the 1800s, the great egret was prized by plume hunters who ravaged these colonies, shooting everything in sight. Many a snowy egret was fated to become part of a lady's hat. As protective laws were passed, populations bounced back. But today, their numbers suffer from a lack of feeding grounds due to the draining of prime wetlands. It has been an unfortunate history for Florida's wading birds. Some of the activity of the rookery is hidden from view. Under the canopy of mangroves, egrets hunt for small fish that rain down from above. There are chicks down there too. Once they tumble out of the nest, they have little chance of making it back. Another threat to the colony comes from the tremendous increase in cattle egrets, a bird native to Africa and Europe. Many experts believe that cattle egrets are forcing small native herons out of their prime nesting sites. Pelican Island is also the nesting grounds of the brown pelican, and in the 1800s, it was its only nesting area on Florida's Atlantic coast. Just as plume hunters were about to lay waste to the pelican population, President Theodore Roosevelt declared Pelican Island a federal refuge. Today, thanks to the brown pelican, we have Pelican Island National Wildlife Refuge. In the annals of Florida bird history is a fascinating occurrence that took place in the white ibis population of Miami's Reynolds Park rookery. In 1961, eggs from Trinidad's scarlet ibis were placed in the nests of several of Reynolds' white ibis. Unexpectedly, the scarlet birds that hatched bred with the white ibis at Reynolds, and unfortunately, their offspring were pink instead of scarlet. As generations passed, the birds became even lighter in color, such as the parent you see here. Today, hardly a trace of color remains from the original scarlet birds. Leaving the rookery, we journey to Lake Okeechobee in search of another bird totally dependent on the bounty of the water. This time, it's an endangered hawk called the snail kite, one of Florida's rarest and most unusual birds. The snail kite feeds on the freshwater apple snail, which itself is becoming less abundant in the Everglades region where the kite lives. Once caught, the snail is plucked from its shell and presented like an hors d'oeuvre to the hungry chick, which never seems to tire of the menu. Fish-Eating Creek is an unspoiled tributary of Lake Okeechobee and the home of Florida's common red-shouldered hawk. By April, the chicks are doing very well high in a cypress tree. Like the snail kite, the red-shouldered is a wetlands hawk. But instead of specializing in exotic meats like the kite does, it kills water snakes, leopard frogs, and other common fare. Sharing habitat with the red-shouldered hawk is the venerable barred owl. What more thrilling moment than to stand in the middle of a lime-green swamp and behold the feathered ruler of the trees. The barred owl is one of the earliest birds to nest. Her chicks are hatched by January. In Florida, there's only one owl that nests in the ground, and that's the burrowing owl. Her habitat is the dry prairie, pineland, and scrubland near Fish-Eating Creek, and throughout much of the peninsula. The burrowing owl is a long-legged bird who can dig her own burrow and run rapidly on the ground in a way that hardly seems owlish. Spring also brings a flourish of nesting activity to the high pineland, especially in the woodpecker family. The largest and most dramatic member is the pileated, whose chicks already have their red crowns. The smaller redhead is a spectacular bird in her own way. She is bright crimson from the shoulders up, but her chick will have to molt its feathers before it can sport a flashy top. Since nearly all American woodpeckers have some red on the head, naming them can be tricky. The red-bellied woodpecker has a lot of red on its crown, but only a faint blush on its belly. When the red-bellied is finished nesting, its vacant cavity provides a site for the eastern bluebird, who could never chip a hole of its own. Do not curse the rains that drive the tourists from our shores each spring, or the humidity that glistens on our brows in the heats of summer. The rains are the salvation of the land, and with each drop comes the start of some tiny event in the web of life. Paper wasps cannot tolerate the soaking rain on their delicate paper chambers, and so they remove it drop by drop until the nest is dry. This is part of their summer routine. The rains bring up mushrooms which rise in the darkness of night. Resurrection ferns unfurl for the first time in many months. It takes them 6 hours to get ready for summer. By now, water is on the move, streaming over the prairies and through the sloughs of the Everglades. Rivers all over the state are overflowing into surrounding cypress strands to replenish vast swamps. And for aquatic creatures, it's time to fill new habitats with new life. The male sailfin molly swishes his neon tail and raises and lowers the sailfin on his back in an elegant mating display. The little female is one of the few fish in the swamp that gives birth to live young rather than laying eggs. Another live bearer is Gambusia, the mosquito minnow. She is ready to repopulate the swamp right away. She doesn't have to lay eggs and wait for the eggs to hatch. Delicate glass shrimps are also busy reproducing. They keep their eggs tucked safely beneath them. The male giant water bug totes a big burden of eggs on his back. It's not his idea. The female lays them there and then just swims away. The mosquito begins life as an aquatic larva. Luckily, most of these are gobbled up before they have a chance to get airborne. The mosquito minnow has a ravenous appetite for mosquito larvae. Summer brings the apple snail out of the water to lay its egg masses. Without this profundity, the snail kite would never survive. Neither would its chief competitor, the limpkin. There is no question that much of Florida's wildlife is either aquatic or, like the purple gallinule, dependent on aquatic species for food. Without water, clean, clear, and undiverted, Florida will become dry, destitute, and uninhabited. To see the aquatic world in supreme form, we must journey to the jewel-like springs that bubble and roil out of the North Florida aquifer. Like no other place in the world, this region has hundreds of individual springs, each with its own character. There are even small rivers like the Ichetuckney that are so peppered with spring vents that the entire waterway is gin clear. The Ichetuckney is so inviting that on a busy weekend, 3,000 tubers come to cool off in the 72-degree flow. The greatest concentration of Florida's springs lies dotted along the Swanee River, a fact not mentioned in Stephen Foster's famous song. An aerial view of a typical spring reveals a distinct line where dark river and clear spring collide at the surface. The crystalline waters rush from a cave-like vent in the limestone bedrock and dance down a short run to the river. Others, like Peacock Spring, are hidden deep in the tangled woods, making them much harder to reach by canoe. Getting there is worth the effort. Although the Swanee has many springs, Florida's two biggest springs are found elsewhere and have become major attractions. Silver Springs near Ocala and Wakulla Springs near Tallahassee are two of the largest springs in the world, and the rivers they give rise to are rich and extraordinary habitats. Schools of mullet swim upriver from the sea to nibble the algae that coats the giant beds of eelgrass. Little sailfin mollies get what's left over. Lurking in the weeds is the Florida gar, a streamlined predator that eats the fish that eat the plants. Another big predator is the bowfin, which is easily recognized by the long, rippling fin on its back. Designed for survival, both the bowfin and the gar can gulp air into their swim bladders whenever oxygen concentrations are low. This may happen in the Everglades, but here in the springs, the conditions are right for survival. A spawning pair of shellcrackers is a good sign that water qualities are high in the flowing springs. The Peninsula cooter does more than clean the algae off the plants. It eats the plants themselves. In the rivers and springs of North Florida lives the notorious alligator snapping turtle, the largest freshwater turtle in the world. How big do these turtles get? Not everyone agrees, but we do know for certain that they can exceed 250 pounds. Even more amazing is the turtle's tongue. If this bizarre appendage looks like a worm to you, you're not alone, because the fish think so too. And that, in part, explains the turtle's success. Yes, reptiles have carved out quite a niche for themselves in the hierarchy of the spring, and there is one that dominates all others. A reptile that swims with the stroke of its tail, that can lie completely submerged for hours at a time, and can crush a big cooter as if it was a can. There are places in Florida where you can watch alligators safely from a boardwalk instead of swimming next to one as our cameraman did. One such place is Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary, an 11,000-acre preserve northwest of Naples. In this paradise of virgin bald cypress trees, you can walk among the wild animals on a 2-mile wooden walkway. You will no doubt be entertained. In the oatmeal mud of the lettuce lakes, big male alligators make their ungainly advances. Mating is accomplished in springtime. Not long after mating, the female lays 40 or so eggs in a gathered mound of earth and plants. Heat from the decaying vegetation helps to incubate the eggs, which hatch into 9-inch babies in about 2 months. Competition in the lettuce lakes is fierce. Not many of the young survive the attacks of wading birds, owls, otters, raccoons, larger alligators, and many other predators, but enough survive. Florida has an estimated population of over 400,000 alligators, far more than any other state. Although it may not seem like good news to some, Florida's wet and warm climate makes it a haven for reptiles of all kinds. The South Florida king snake is totally harmless and very beneficial in keeping the rodent population in check. The rough green snake is an innocent little climber that feeds on insects. It's hard to spot one in the vegetation. But Florida also has its share of poisonous snakes. The venom of the coral snake is highly toxic, but luckily the snake's mouth is too small to bite most parts of the human anatomy. One snake to watch out for when trekking the swamps is the cottonmouth. This poisonous viper often hunts in the water, but it doesn't like to lie on the bottom where you're not likely to see it. If a bit of caution is used, the cottonmouth is no reason to avoid the wetlands. There are land turtles to be found on higher terrain. The Florida box turtle is fairly common, but the much larger gopher tortoise is becoming endangered. These burrowing tortoises suffer from both a loss of habitat and the fact that people like to eat them. Killing gophers is illegal. On warm, balmy summer nights, a wonderful drama is reenacted many times on the beaches of Florida's Atlantic coast. For those lucky enough to see it, the nesting of a loggerhead turtle is something to treasure and remember. Sea turtle nests are found by following the turtle's deep tracks up the sandy beach from the direction of the surf. By the time she is found, the turtle may have already dug a 3-gallon hole and begun laying her eggs. 10 dozen slimy ping-pong balls. She must not be approached prior to this.
Look at all those eggs.
Careful, don't get too close.
Shedding tears is the turtle's way of eliminating excess salt from swallowing seawater. After the eggs are laid, the loggerhead packs the sand tightly to protect the nest with a hard cap of sand. The temperature of the eggs during the 2-month incubation may determine the sex of the hatchlings, as it does in the black sea turtle. Warmer eggs become females, cooler eggs males. There are many threats to the survival of the loggerhead, as there are to all 8 of the world's sea turtle species. Electric lights too close to the beach can lure the hatchlings away from the direction of the sea to a certain death. Many turtles that make it to the ocean are killed by pollutants or caught and drowned in fish nets before they ever reach reproductive age. It is now clear that we must take all measures necessary to ensure the survival of the world's amazing sea turtles before they are lost forever. By late summer, Florida is a buzzing world of insects. Everywhere we look, insects and other small life forms are thriving, and the sounds of their infinite singing fill the oppressive air. In the water of the Big Cypress Swamp, it seems that everything that could have hatched has hatched. It's all here now. Everything is in full swing on the surface and below. The heron knows this, but sees only what its eyes are capable of seeing. A group of students from Miami has been told that the shallow waters are not what they appear to be from a car moving at 50 miles an hour on the Tamiami Trail. There are living specks in the water that even the heron is not aware of. Little whirling schools of colonial rotifers, each colony no bigger than the head of a pin. And hydras that are relatives of the jellyfish, but finer than threads, groping blindly in the plants for food. A hand lens is helpful in seeing the detail in a tiny water flea bearing 3 precious eggs. The swamp water also swarms with copepods. The females wear their egg sacs like a skirt. A red water mite is big enough to see with the naked eye, but not strong enough to escape the surface tension of a water drop. In beds of aquatic plants, the miniature dramas of life take place. A tiny water scorpion nymph snatches an ostracod from its leg and fixes it to the end of its piercing beak. The ostracod will be cracked open like a microscopic walnut. And so the water drifting south from the Everglades into Florida Bay and the 10,000 islands arrives at the mangrove fringe with life suspended in it. The myriad living specks, which at first seem unimportant to us, are vital food for dozens of different fish that spawn in the brackish waters among the roots of the red mangrove. Even more food comes from the underwater breakdown of fallen mangrove leaves to satisfy the needs of shrimp, crabs, and other crustaceans. But the mangroves play yet another crucial role in the ecology of the coast. By blunting the power of the waves and trapping sediments around their roots, mangroves both build and protect the land. In the soft muds that accumulate, land crabs excavate their subterranean cities to harvest and store the never-ending manna of mangrove leaves bestowed from above. Like a lovely necklace extending from Miami southwestward is that well-known archipelago called the Florida Keys. Where the chain of keys passes close to the mainland, it creates Biscayne Bay and Florida Bay. But then it strays further and begins to take on an air of independence before ending suddenly at Key West. In all, there are 97 islands, as well as some small mangrove patches that don't really deserve the title of key. From the air, mangroves can be seen rimming some of the less developed islands, such as Elliott Key on the border of Biscayne National Park. But the story of the Keys is like the story of much of wild Florida. It is the story of habitats on the verge and wildlife on the brink. This plight is brought into sharp focus in the pine and palmetto scrub of Florida's lower Keys, for this is the home of the diminutive key deer. The key deer looks like a full-sized whitetail of which it is merely an offshoot race. But when you get close, it becomes evident that you are dealing with something no bigger than a collie. The total population of key deer, estimated at 300 animals, is confined to Big Pine Key and several neighboring islands 30 miles above Key West. Here, long about late afternoon each day, dozens of the little deer leave their native habitat to enter the world of man. For the key deer, this particular ritual does not seem like much of a problem. But as the deer have lost their fear of man, they have also lost their caution. On the roads of Big Pine Key, motorists accidentally kill about 50 key deer every year. Like the snail kite, the sea turtle, the panther, and the manatee, the case of the disappearing deer will require brains, money, and sacrifice on man's part in order to assure long-term survival. Not far off the coast of Key Largo is the largest stretch of tropical coral reef in the United States. Here, at depths reachable by snorkel, one can find in the forests of elkhorn coral many of the same tropical fish found on the great reefs of the Caribbean. This is John Pennycamp Coral Reef State Park, the jewel of the Florida Keys, America's first underwater park. The key to the coral reef is its architecture. Boulders and antlers of living coral create a million hiding places for fish and schools of fish. The reef is a fortress of stone. Most reef fish are born in the mangrove estuaries, but as they grow larger, there isn't enough of the right kind of food to sustain them, and so they move offshore. Out here on the reef, there is a bounty of food. The numbers of small fish are so impressive that we see in this mass of glass minnows a blizzard rather than a school. Shipwrecks also provide a world of nooks and crannies where fish can hide from predators. Recently, near Miami, an artificial reef was created exactly where they wanted it by sinking a fleet of old ships. In Pennycamp, a school of porkfish takes refuge in the wreck of the Benwood, which was bequeathed to the sea by a German sub in 1942. Besides fish of every color and shape, the reef is home to an impressive collection of invertebrates. The spiny lobster is of particular importance, although it is only a scavenger. The southern stingray is one of a half-dozen rays on the reef. With its humble diet of mussels and small crustaceans, the only thing to fear about this fish is the poisonous barb on its tail. Another graceful swimmer on the reef is the hawksbill turtle, which stays at sea except when laying her eggs. Only a few hawksbill nests have ever been documented on Florida beaches. It has been 2 months since the female loggerhead hauled her 300 pounds through the moonlit surf and buried 120 eggs in a secret cache. She hasn't been back since. It wasn't easy for the little ones after hatching to struggle all day through a foot of hard-packed sand without any help from mother. And now they've got to find their own way to the sea, quickly, before predators get them. After that, it's anybody's guess what will happen. the sea being what it is. But if things go well, 20 years from now, a turtle from this brood will return to this beach, the beach of her ancestors, to leave her own signature in wild Florida sand.